We're gathered here today to talk about some of the long-term results, particularly at Meriden. So I'm not covering the whole state like Mark did before. This is sort of one trial over a long period of time. Caroline Peake is a new person in our office, but she's a wealth of experience in the northern of the state, and David Barron, of course, based in Northern from our office. So let's start with the key messages. Well, retaining stubble was probably the biggest thing on this sandy clay loam. Increased the yield over 15 seasons on average of 5.7% compared to burning it. And the other thing was spacing. We lost about 1% per inch. We increased the spacing more than 7 inches. And perhaps the lower tillering lines that David will talk about later might be useful in dry environments, or drier than we had here. So just a bit of background on this trial. It started by Steve Porritt back in 1987 when it was funded by the Wheat Industry Research Council, I think it was called at the time. The heavy sandy clay loam, we had 2 levels of stubble, so it was burnt every year and retained stubble every year, so whatever crop grows is the stubble that stays there. 4 spacings, 9, 18, 27 and 36 for the younger members of the audience. For the more senior people, 3.5, 7, 10, 14 inches. Also a lot of equipment is sold in inches, so I have to still talk in inches because the important seeders are in inches. The row orientation is 21 degrees west of north, which can be important too for other reasons. 6 replications, because Steve Porritt thought there's going to be small differences and you need a lot of replications if you're looking at small differences. And each year the same treatment is applied to the same plot. So there's 48 plots in total. Now for 2013, this is the interesting thing, things change around a bit. So I'll just go through what happened in 2013 since it's fresh in everyone's mind. We put a fair rate of maize seed on, thinking, well, we did actually get 4 tonnes of yield one year, so at 50 plants per square metre per tonne, we were tasting about a 4 tonne potential. So Bill Bowden might laugh about it, but anyway, we put a fair rate of seed on. The fertiliser though, we decided to put none on because the phosphorus was fairly high in the soil and we had some summer rain which would have activated some nitrogen. So right or wrong, put none on. And this is the first year we used Sakura as well as a herbicide. The rainfall was, let's see here, that we had a fair amount in January and March, so that sort of would have triggered a fair bit of nitrogen activity in big falls too. And then of course we had a very dry June, and then by about the 12th of July I think it was when everything started. So, and then of course at the end of the season, our normal September rain is 23 mils and we had 46. And October was pretty good as well. It was early October, so it did help. This is the machine we've been sowing this trial with for years, and this year was the first year we had the auto steer. So previous to that we've had driven by micrometer, which tended to wander at least 9 inches between each year. We use a set of press wheels on behind and a ring harrow, which is not a new invention. It's ring harrows were actually placed on the 1924 seed drills that were made in Fremantle here. So I'm just using a ring harrow to bring some soil back over the top of the row to reduce crusting. Now here's probably not quite as easy to see as it is on my monitor, but the left-hand plot there is the stubble retained, which is much greener than the burnt one on the right. Most years at this time of the year you wouldn't see that sort of difference, but in 2013 we had big patches in this plot here that were far less vigorous. And there's a few windmill grass weeds too in the stubble retained. So that's what it looked like, the 9 centimetres on the 2nd of September, the 18 centimetres, the 27 and the 36. At 36 you can see a few windmill grass plants still between the rows. And that's in the middle of the day, so it's nearly north orientation. Now there was a hump between the rows on the 27 centimetre treatment, And this year, because it takes a long time to sow this dry, it takes all day to put this dry in, we missed it. We couldn't get that one in until the next day. Unfortunately, we had 4 mils of rain overnight. So this treatment was sown 1 day later, which you know is always going to affect things. So you normally think that would have a negative effect, but it had the opposite. So we can speculate on why that could be. The 36 centimetre rows, there tend to be a bit of a hollow between them. So this area here, the soil being pushed out by the seeder, left a bit of a hollow between the rows. And then harvesting, I've been using these crop lifters that were made years ago for doing lentil work, based on a design by my dad, because they're nice and skinny, so they'll fit in between the lentils quite easily. But I use them on this trial to keep the ryegrass into the plot header, and we can back the wind off to keep more of the ryegrass taken away each year. That's roughly what the 9 centimetre looks like after harvest. But you can see how the stubble is sort of concentrated a little bit in the centre. Well, after harvest each year, I go with the rake and just spread that back out again, so it's more uniform. Before any summer rain, because the summer rain will cause more weeds. It's too concentrated. Now, the yield for this 2013. The stubble retained ones were much higher, averaging 370 kilos. I've never seen it that high before versus burning. And also, just about a flat line with spacing. Normally a nice trend downwards, but this year, perhaps the late rain, but there was a very, very little response to spacing, or no response really. People ask about protein. Well, yes, generally the protein tends to go up with the wider rows, but generally that's because of low yield, but not this year. And also this one here, that 27 centimetre, had one of the highest proteins and the highest yield, and that's the retained one. Good question of why. Just for interest, I've got to put up all the years because you can't crop every year on this heavy sandy clay line. Back in 1987 when it started, it was 5 years of continuous wheat, and then I think Bob French came along and said, Glen, you've got to put peas in there. If you haven't got a pulse, you're dead. So the following year was a massive year. We nearly got 4 tonnes. I guess, and then we started a rotation to keep some sort of rotation going anyway, rather than continuous wheat. And there was there was 2 years of chemical fallow. It just didn't rain too much that year, so we decided to chemical fallow. And also in 2008, same thing, just getting late and dry, option to keep the weeds under control, chemical fallow. But the average of all wheat crops in that time, and this is what has been occurring nearly all the way, is that the stubble retained ones are in front, and as the rows go wider, we're losing yield. So that was the key message. Now there's another trial in here in this year that David Barron helped to organise, and we sowed this one with 2 varieties. Mace is one of the standards, but then with his DAFWA, which is a restricted tillering one, and the idea was to put some foliar N on as needed. But as the season turned out, we didn't need to put any on, but the 2 spacings went to really wide, 10 inches and 20 inches, to see what these restricting lines could do. Some a bit early, 23rd of May. Once again, no fertiliser for this paddock, and Sakura. And that's sowing at the widest rows. Caroline Peak, that most important person, because to keep that low amount of seed up to the machine. And Cam Wild, of course, driving the tractor. He's a great technical officer. And here, working in the wide rows, this is what the mace looked like. So it's standing up nicely. Unfortunately, the DBW10 tended to fall over. Dave will talk about that in a minute too. And the yield, that interesting thing here with yield, this treatment here was supposed to be just mace, and that one was mace with N applied, which we didn't put on, so these two are effectively just the zone, so there's really no difference there. But the interesting thing was that 10 inches and 20 inches, no difference in yield. We would have thought, well, maybe we should have went to 30 inches into summer cropping. Where would it have come in 2013? But this other one didn't do so well. Now I might get David to talk about that.
Okay, so just a little bit of background to reduced tillering lines is that they've become more available in the last probably decade or so. CSRO are actually been working on them quite a lot. Quite a few other people have played with them around the world, including CIMMIT, and there's a big program in the United Kingdom as well. And the basic premise is that if you have a reduced tillering line, it uses less water in a dry environment and saves that water to a post-anthesis period. And like all good experiments, somebody called Murphy decided he wanted to interfere this year, and our post-anthesis had more rain than probably we've seen in the last decade and a half. So it pretty much interfered with our hypothesis that if you could save water over from earlier in the season, you could have a compensatory effect with a reduced tillering line. So CSIRO have done quite a bit of work. I've done a little bit of work as well. And some of these reduced tillering wheats are very, very strongly reduced tillering. You can basically get away with one stem. So the 3 plants that you see there were selected out of a planting of about 50 to 100 plants per square metre, and they basically don't tiller. And you can actually take these plants through to the subsequent years and show that even with heaps of nitrogen, they'll only produce 1, 2, very occasionally 3, and if you're really, really lucky, 4 tillers on them. The characteristic is when you compare it to maize under a high nitrogen environment, you basically get maize just prolifically tillering. These things won't tiller very much at all. The theory is that, of course, you'll get less water use. And going last year up to Beacon and watching some of these late germinating crops that came up on July the 12th or thereabouts, the primary head ran up quite nicely, but then it had 4 to 5 tillers subsequently on that plant because there's so much nitrogen available. Those heads never formed, so you only had the primary. So there was a lot of very wasted water in those environments last year. Even though the plant growth looked really good, we really actually were quite wasteful. So if you can actually think about how Glenn talked a little bit about row spacing there, the humps between the rows, could we water harvest, combine that with a plant which is more water efficient, can you actually get lower rainfall amounts to give you reasonable yields? So that, you know, for people who are only getting 100 mils of rain in some of those environments, 2010, particularly in the low rainfall belt last year, people only having less than 100 millimetres of rain, trying to achieve good yields. They're the sorts of concepts that we were looking at in trying to do this experiment. Unfortunately, our hypothesis really could not be tested because of that spring rain. One of the characteristics of this material is that you can actually get very high yield. So those plants there, even though they're growing in pretty much a standard crop, are producing 5 grams of grain per ear. And when you think that maize, if you're lucky, you're going about 1.2 grams, there is a lot of potential. So these have got a very, very big sink size. There's a lot of potential being left available in these plants. And the real challenge, I think, is going to be when, you know, Glenn pointed out the narrow row spacing, is putting these into narrow row spacing with the right amount of nitrogen, trying to achieve 2-3 grams per ear, seeing if we can actually push yields up in those environments. So Glenn's pretty much summarised these: retaining stubble, increased yield over burning in 15-week seasons. So that's a pretty consistent effect, except for 2013, where, as we know, for most people, having lots of water at the end of the season can compensate for a lot of other problems in your paddocks. And you saw that overall wheat yield decreased with increasing row spacing. Not a huge amount, but when you think that narrow row spacing was 3.7% higher yield compared to the standard row spacing, there's 3.7% potential multiplied out. It's probably quite a substantial increase in profit by going to those lower, narrower row spacings if you've got the equipment. And we continue to hypothesise, and fortunately we've got a lot of seed coming out of last year to see whether or not in those really dry environments how we can start to manipulate combinations of the low tillering characteristic with water harvesting processes to improve performance at late season. And CSIRO has shown that this works in the eastern states under environments where there is only water available from the soil. If you cut the rainfall off, you can actually get higher yields and much better grain size. So the hypothesis is right. What we've got to do is show that we can do it in Western Australia. Thank you.